am really, really excited to be leading another GraphQL for Mobile panel here at Summit. I want to introduce all of our panelists. So looking at what the order is on the screen, we're going to start with Martin. Martin, why don't you introduce yourself?
Hello, everyone. Hello, Hélène. So I'm Martin. Martin in French. I come from Paris, and I'm joining from Paris. I've been working at Apollo for a little bit more than 1 year on Apollo Android, and actually working on the project for a bit longer because I joined from the community. So been working on Apollo Android for something like 2-3 years now. Love Kotlin, love GraphQL, love Androids, and super happy to be here. Looking forward to all the questions.
Awesome. Thanks a lot, Martin. And Olivier, how about yourself?
Sure. I'm also French. Hi, I'm Olivier, but I work in San Francisco, actually. I work at Netflix. I've been at Netflix for the past 4 years or something like that. And recently, I've been contributing with Martin on Apollo Android 3. So really excited about Apollo Android and open source libraries in general.
Cool. Thanks a lot. All right. Continuing clockwise, we have Camila.
Hi, my name's Camila. I am the head of financial products engineering over at Gusto, and there about 2 years. I am not French, but I am Jamaican. So, as we can continue the international theme there, and also joining from San Francisco.
Cool. And finally, Anthony.
Hi, everyone. My name is Anthony. I am the iOS developer, well, one of the 2 iOS developers over here at Apollo GraphQL working on our Swift client. And I'm really excited to be here today as well. Thanks for having us.
Excellent. And I am Ellen Shapiro. I'm a mobile developer advocate here at Apollo. I was previously working with Anthony on the iOS Swift SDK. And today we're just going to have a conversation about a bunch of stuff around mobile applications, around mobile and GraphQL. And if you're interested in asking some questions, just go ahead and put your questions into the session tab in Hopin, and we'll try to get to as many as we can. And oh yeah, and also hi, I'm from Madison, Wisconsin. So I also wanted to sort of joke with Olivier and Martin. We've recently hired another Android developer who is also in Paris. His name is Benoit. Do you need to know French in order to use the Apollo Android SDK?
That's a good question. You need to know, no, I don't know. You need to know nothing. Maybe GraphQL, a little bit of GraphQL, but we hope to make it as easy as possible to use the SDK. And no, there is no comment in French, so everything is in English. All the commits are in English. I mean, I hope so.
It's not even one where like it's like the regular commit is in English, and then there's like the sub message is like just cursing in French or something like that.
So yeah. You can see some sentences. I don't have any example in mind at hand, but there are definitely occasions where you can read some sentences in French and see an exact word-for-word translation, which is not good, I guess. But we're doing the same in English too. So something like makes sense in English. I'm using it all the time in French, and it doesn't make any sense in French. Like faire du sens doesn't mean anything, but I'm still using it all the time. So I'm sure this happens the other way around.
All right. So I want to talk a little bit about Apollo Android 3, which is our Android SDK that's currently in beta. Olivier, you work at Netflix, and your team at Netflix has been really active in helping to test Apollo Android 3. How did you get involved in that testing?
Sure. So actually looking back, I think the story started in 2020 when at Netflix, we decided to investigate replacing our internal clients, which are powered by Farcore, with GraphQL. And I think one of the goal was actually to leverage as much as possible open source libraries. And at that time, of course, Apollo Android was and is still I think one of the most advanced open source GraphQL clients. So we tested it late 2020, and the experience was already great. And we saw opportunities for improvements in both, I think, APIs and performance. So just to give a few examples, I think the code generated models were maybe a bit rough, to discover. And also we discovered some weaknesses in parsing performance. So from there, we basically started some discussions with Apollo engineers, so Martin here, as well as open source contributors. Ivan is a good example of a big contributor of the Apollo Android open source client. And so really it was just engineering talks about how we could improve the APIs, improve the performance and things like that. At that time, I believe that Apollo Android 3 was still in incubation. And by that, I mean that nothing was deployed yet, or it was just, pre-alpha kind of. But really, I think it shaped the plans or the targets for Apollo Android 3. And Martin actually came up with a very thorough list of things that would be included. So changes, improvements in Apollo Android 3. And so really our involvement started there. So I guess involvement means multiple things in that context. We slightly contributed to Apollo Android 3, but most of the time what we're doing, we're actually using the client at scale, as well as providing our feedbacks and use cases and things like that.
Excellent. Martin, can you talk about sort of what you were able to do with getting feedback on some of these pre-alphas and alphas from a team that's really using this?
Yeah, and what I wanted to say is that getting feedback is a huge contribution in itself. Like Apollo Android would be nowhere where it is today without the feedback from Olivier and also Netflix team. So yeah. If you're using the project, please send us feedback. This is really important so that we can improve the library. One of the big feedback we got from the Netflix team is about performance. Like we have this SQL cache that we've been using in Apollo 2.x that is doing tons and tons of reads because it needs to read. Well, I don't want to go into the rabbit hole of normalized caching 10 minutes down in the talk, but it does a lot of reads. And this was super slow. So we worked together to improve that. And we have easily a twofold improvement, but I'm thinking in real life use cases, it's more like 4-5 times improvement in production. So this is something that was a really successful contribution and also a successful project working hand in hand, because Olivier was able to test on real life use cases, which we don't always have. And we were able to iterate really fast on this. So that was really cool.
That's awesome. Martin, is there anything else you want to sort of plug about Apollo Android 3 coming soon?
Yes, so many things. Yeah, so I didn't introduce Apollo Android 3, so it's basically a Kotlin rewrite. So that was the main goal of Apollo Android 3. It has a lot of stuff, but the main thing, if I needed to introduce Apollo Android 3, is it's a Kotlin rewrite. So it's 100% written in Kotlin. With coroutine APIs, and it's written with multi-platform in mind. So it's already working for iOS, macOS, even Wear OS if you want to develop watchOS apps, even JavaScript. So this is all working thanks to Kotlin multi-platform. So that was one of the main goals of Apollo Android 3. And then on top of that, we added lots and lots of performance improvements. Something that I'm pretty excited about is new client directives. So we have something called the declarative cache that will hopefully make it a lot easier to work with your cache. We have new directives to handle nullability. The list goes on. Stop me, but yeah.
No, I'm gonna let you keep talking just until you run out of stuff. If people are interested in finding out more about Apollo Android 3, where should they go?
GitHub repo. We have betas there. We have a changelog. You can already use the beta. It's all deployed on Maven Central, so you can use them. We have a few folks using it in production. And please send feedback. We're hoping to get to stable by the end of the year. So if you have feedback, send it now. It's still time to change APIs. Once we go stable, it's going to be way harder.
Yeah, for sure. And then Olivier, I just wanted to ask one more question, sort of related to your testing. You mentioned that you switched from Falcor, which I believe is an internal client at Netflix, over to using Apollo. What have you seen as sort of the benefits and the drawbacks of doing that?
That's a very good question. I think let's take a step back. Actually, just about our Falcor client. What does it mean to develop a client internally? I think the benefits, it might be high performance because it's highly tailored towards your needs, your data structures, and things like that, right? It's highly customized, so you can access the data in a fine-grained way and all these things, which might not be a good thing, by the way, but if your models are changing, regressions can happen everywhere. But anyway, still benefits, right, for developers. But the drawbacks are pretty big because everything is internal. So the maintenance and the innovation cost that goes with it is actually pretty high. Any iteration, you actually need to plan resources to work on it. Any adoption of good practices, modern architectures, they need to be worked on internally, right? So it's pretty high as a cost. And I think also something that people, new hires especially, told us was that the learning curve was high because everything is internal. Falcor, the specs are open source, but they are not used by that many companies. And so the learning curve is pretty high, which is a very, very important drawbacks for new hires. So now going to open source, and especially the Apollo Android library, right? What does it mean? Like, what are the drawbacks and benefits? I think one of the drawbacks could be that the client is less tailored. So that's kind of the reverse from the other one, right? The client is less tailored to your needs. So you have to adapt, where you have to engineer around what Apollo is meant to do. Which is good as well, because you can leverage all the open source tools or the open source, code that is available there. And maybe another drawbacks is for really small things, iteration might be a bit slower. Let's say you just want to add a param to a request. You might need to wait, depending on release cycle, you might need to wait a few days to 1 week, 2 weeks. I don't think it's a big drawback, but I still wanted to mention it. But the benefits, in my opinion, at least, just outweigh all these drawbacks because, like we talked about for the internal client, the cost is high, right? At the opposite of the spectrum, here the model is more distributed, right? So there are developers working on Apollo Android at Apollo. There's the open source community contributing. There are companies working around Apollo. So the maintenance and the innovation is actually distributed. So the cost is much, much lower than an internal client. And also as many companies, many developers are using an open source libraries, I think you get better quality out of the box because many use cases were actually, tested with that client, with that library. And so these use cases can replicate over companies. And so you get that quality out of the box kind of. I think the last point I would get for benefits is also, it's a full ecosystem, especially with GraphQL. So you not only leverage a client like Apollo Android, but you also leverage all the tools, all the knowledge, all the IDs, expertise that is part of that ecosystem. So just for example, Apollo Federation is a good example of how you can manage your graph at scale in a company. I think GraphQL Playground is also an excellent example on how to discover your graph, and that's open source. So all these tools you can leverage. They are here, they are contributed to, and really that distribution is key for us. I think that's a win-win situation for everyone.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Olivier. So I want to go next to Camilla, because Camilla, you gave a talk at Summit last year, sort of called going from 0 to 1 with GraphQL at Gusto. What number would you say you guys are at now?
I don't know. I guess how high does the scale go? Is it 100? What's the top?
Yeah.
So, GraphQL is something that Gusto had started to adopt before we were working on the mobile apps, and we made an early decision to use GraphQL as our primary light clients across the mobile apps as we were spinning those up. And so, yeah, we did launch that last year, and that was sort of, you know, that first feature set. I think if I think about the difference between where we were now versus a year ago, there's definitely there's a lot more like adoption of GraphQL across the company. And that's really also helped us get to like more pain points, but also like figuring out what things have evolved correctly and what things haven't evolved correctly. We've been doing a lot more migration of parts of Gusto that were not before using GraphQL. And some of that's motivated as we've brought in additional functionality into our mobile apps, right? So like earlier this year, we brought in like time tracking into our mobile apps. And that was something where it was actually a really interesting like exercise of looking at like the current endpoints and then like looking at like potential versions of the schema that we could build to model this use case within our mobile apps.
Yeah.
And like
how
also
do you sorry, go ahead.
Oh yeah, and then seeing like what scales and doesn't.
Yeah. How do you go through that process? Like who's involved in figuring out like what's going to go into the schema, and you know, how do you work with that?
Yeah, I would say this is also something that's evolved over the past year. So actually, in part inspired by I think a Netflix talk with Apollo. There was a part of it where you talked about having like a schema working group. And so I think similarly, that's also something that we've started to do within Gusto, like a schema advisory group that has like folks from across the company. We already had like a GraphQL guild as well. And that's also, you know, like between like those like guilds, like we have like office hours, we have like, you know, guild meetings, et cetera. And so, and we have our Slack channels. And so there are a lot of different ways that people will either like ask for help as they're trying to like add in new things, or if there's something, you know, like you constantly have folks who are like maybe like new to GraphQL who are trying to figure out like what is the right way to do that. And then the last piece there is that we've also started working on this like North Star like living document of like what we think the best practices are as we evolve the schema. For that in particular, I would say for an individual feature, usually this is something that we try to collaborate, you know, like across the stack. And, you know, a lot like for this one, for time tracking in particular, the engineer who was adding in the schema, you know, she sort of looked at the lay of the land of like all of the like REST endpoints that existed for time tracking for all the different features. And we looked at like what existed so far in the graph, because there were some parts that existed in the graph already. And then knowing like what we knew at that time is like, now we know like, here are things that we would like to do. Here are things that we know are like, this is not going to scale. Like, oh, maybe this will be an N+1, right? And so knowing all that we knew at that point, she proposed like a couple different versions of like a schema, a shape of the schema for modeling that. And then, you know, had a couple of different sessions and advertised it through the company. And then we went with a version.
Nice. And talking about sort of different versions of the schema, we got a question from the audience that I think also Olivier would love to hear your opinion on as well, if you have one. The question is from Irina Fernandez, and it's, how do you manage schema differences in different environments? Do you have multiple sets of Apollo generated classes for each environment, staging, and production? So Camilla, do you want to take that one first, or?
Yeah, sure. So we usually deploy the same version of the graph to all the different ones. So staging, production, demo, like all of our different environments eventually get the same one. They of course get it deployed in a different order. But that's what we have gone with, is having like that same version of it. And so there can sometimes be like, if you deploy a change, there'll obviously be like some point in time where there will be some differences between the graphs and the environments. But as soon as it's like deployed out to everything has the same version.
Cool. Olivier, how does that work at Netflix?
Similar, but we actually use sometimes variants just to test if a new schema can be, you know, better, or if we can leverage like new fields or things like that. We don't use it too often, but that's something we did this beginning of the year. So we had two variants at some point working in the same Android app. If your modules are highly separated enough, I think the models are not gonna, you know, contradict with each other. So that worked for us for a certain period of time. I wouldn't encourage to do that at scale. Like Camilla was saying, I think it's better to have just a schema the same across many environments, because you might have functional testing that is working in your continuous integration, and you want this test to work against the same graph and the same schema. But yeah, it's possible to use it.
Nice. And I'll throw this out to both of you. When you have sort of a new piece of data that's being added, is that something where that piece of data is sort of added to the schema before it's actually added to any of the UI? Or is it something where, like, how do you handle sort of adding new stuff to the graph?
Yeah, I mean, we definitely aim at going schema first, right? So like make those changes. And sometimes depending on like the size of the change, we sometimes add things to the schema that are not necessarily backed yet by like the full data, and that sort of unblocks teams. So instead of having like this like blocker of like, we have to wait for like this giant new change to like go out like end to end, that allows like all of the client engineers to be able to like develop things sort of in parallel.
Cool. Olivier, you're nodding very much. That sounds like very similar there.
Yeah, very similar. And I think to Camilla's point, Apollo Federation can make that easy as well, because you might have a fake service, fake data being returned while that service is actually being developed. So that's a big plus for, like, you can still add new fields to a schema and just have them for UI developers to start working on their features. And that's totally fine.
Nice. Cool. Thank you both for answering that question. I want to go back to Camilla, because Camilla, you recently were promoted to being an engineering manager, which is awesome. How has that changed how you look at GraphQL at Gusto?
Yeah, I mean, I think even before making that shift, which, thank you, yeah, it is definitely a shift, yeah. But even before that, I think, like as a more senior engineer, you're already going to start to like flex into like coaching roles, right? And really looking to see like how you can like influence on different parts of like architecture decisions, et cetera. And so that was sort of already like a path that I was going on. I would say that I've continued on that in some ways as well. And that helps me like sort of keep like understand, like as we're thinking about like complexity of potential like new projects, et cetera, or like pain points maybe that like engineers are feeling, that really helps me like keep sort of like close to the ground. And then, yeah, when helpful, like, and when we're trying to figure out like new schema pieces, especially sometimes we're diving into things that like there's not necessarily an established pattern. And that's often something too, where I like to help see if I can like help brainstorm like with different directions.
Cool. Awesome. I'm going to move on to Anthony to talk a little bit about Apollo iOS. So Anthony has been super heads down working on code generation basically since he got here in January. But he's poked his head up above the sand in the last few weeks. And Anthony, I want you to talk a little bit about all of the work that's been going on to move Apollo iOS to a 1.0. Anthony, you are muted. Is not muted.
No, I'm not muted. Hello?
Yay, there you are.
Oh, okay. Yeah, hi guys. So I am really excited to talk about what I've been working on. It's been almost a year that we've been working on rewriting the fundamental foundations of the whole Apollo iOS library. And that all starts with CodeGen. Our CodeGen engine is being rewritten completely in Swift. So the biggest benefit of that is that it allows Swift developers to extend the code generation engine and to contribute more easily. We're building out the MVP right now for what we wanted to do and what needs to be functional in order to have feature parity with what currently exists. But we have tons of ideas for things we want to add in the future. And I think the community already has a lot of ideas for things that they'd like to add. Custom directives on client side that can be added to your generated models. Additional options for how you want to generate your models. All of these things are going to be a lot easier for iOS developers to contribute to and build when it's in Swift. So I'm really excited to be doing that. But on top of that, the most exciting part, I think, is that the generated code is now going to be far, far smaller and far easier to understand and read. So we've re-architected it. We've broken out a lot of the repetitive things that were being generated as boilerplate in the generated models and put those in protocols that now the generated model objects just conform to, as well as restructuring the way that the execution layer handles the parsing of the selections in your query, which allows us to make it a lot easier to understand and read the description of what you're actually fetching, what your data looks like. I ran an experiment yesterday, and I'm excited to say that I have an example query that running on the old version of the code gen was a 3,186 line generated model object. And with the new code gen, it's going to be 386 lines. So your generated models are going to be like,
That's pretty sick.
10% of the size in many cases as what they were before. And this is going to be a big deal for binary size, for your package size just of your entire repo. But also, I'm not sure if you guys have experienced this, but with Xcode, if you open a file that's 10,000 lines, Xcode just completely freezes on you for about 20 seconds. And so it's really been a problem for a lot of people in our community. And I'm really, really excited to be delivering this. The best part of this is that it really opens us up to so many new things that we can deploy on top of this new foundational layer.
That's really awesome. Now, this is not yet ready for testing, but we are accepting feedback for it. So I'll ask Kurt, if he's listening, to throw a link to, there's an RFC on the iOS repo that people can take a look at and get a absolutely ridiculous amount of detail provided by Anthony about how this works. If you have more direct questions about it, please just let us know. Do you have, like, I'm not going to try to like make you commit to like a timeline like in public, because that's just mean. But do you have sort of a general target of like when we're hoping to be able to have people test this out?
Yeah, we are going to, our goal right now is to have an alpha of this, hopefully by the end of the year. If not, then early next year, January, hopefully of next year at the latest. With the holidays coming up, it makes it a little hard to deploy things. But it will be a alpha version. It won't have all of the functionality. One of the biggest parts of this that we haven't gotten around to starting the implementation on yet is the mutable cache. So when you need to actually make local mutations to the cache, we're going to be creating a whole set of mutable models that allow you to interact with that in a much more fine-grained and meaningful way than what we've had in the past. But that part isn't really finished yet. So I expect the first alpha version to be out that won't support mutable caching, but otherwise will be fully featured, hopefully by the end of the year or January. And I'm sure that will have a lot of edge cases that we haven't solved and a lot of bugs we haven't found yet. So I'm really excited to get the community to try it out and give us some feedback and tell us what we've missed. Awesome. I think people are really going to love it.
Yeah. And then I know that you've recently published a new roadmap. Do you want to talk a little bit about what's coming after 1.0?
Sure, yeah. So like I said, 1.0 was setting up the foundations for allowing people to extend the generated models, which are the biggest surface area that other developers who consume Apollo really work with. You make your requests through the networking layer, but after you get a response back, it's all these generated models, and that's what you're interacting with. So being able to configure those, being able to use, what Martin was talking about with Android, where you can use client-side directives to indicate caching mechanisms and where your key fields are and things like that, we want to make easier to do. But after we get through the 1.0 version, the next thing we're going to be working on is the networking layer. I really want to rewrite our networking layers, at least the public surface of it, to be more extensible. We are looking into possibly doing something closer to what the Apollo client web does right now, where you can have all of these different, the Apollo link layer is what they call it in Apollo client web, that allows you to diverge where your requests are going, add additional headers, parse, log, anything you want to do in the networking layer just by chaining your request through a set of objects that you can create. And that's something that right now we have sort of an implementation of, but it doesn't allow for a lot of the functionality people have requested in the past. So we're going to do that. Yes.
Oh, I was just gonna say I can talk about that because I wrote it. Sorry. It's actually more based on sort of like OKHTTP style headers where it's sort of more of a like, okay, everything's just going in one direction. And I think one of the things about Apollo Link that we've been sort of working on is being able to sort of say, okay, depending on what you're doing, here's what you want to do without having to like make a use case in every single set of interceptors that you create. So it's definitely a lot better than it was before, but I know we still have a ton of room for improvement.
Yeah, it definitely is way better than it was before.
Yeah, it was.
I think that some of the biggest use cases that I've seen the community talk about that we want to cover there is, if you want to deal with multiple different schemas, you need to be able to route those to different network endpoints. And that's going to be a lot easier. And also with subscriptions, you have a completely different networking layer when you're doing a WebSocket. And so being able to reuse the components for all of your parsing and all of your validation and your authentication and headers and things like that, but put it to different endpoints and actually have your network transport layer different is going to be really valuable.
Awesome. I've got a question from the audience that says, Mazalan P, support for mutation cache soon? Sounds like full offline support. Does that sound like full offline support to you?
I want to be very clear that it doesn't. And thank you for the question, Mazalan. That's a great question. The goal here is to make a really robust caching mechanism. This is not going to be the same as a persistence layer like core data, where you can have a fully offline application and mutate the cache and add data to it and never have it go back up to a source of truth on the server. Of course, you'll be able to access cache data well in offline mode, but this is supposed to be a cache representation of the data you've retrieved from your GraphQL schema. It shouldn't be expected to replace any other data persistence models that you would use.
Awesome. Thank you for clarifying that. And yeah, what, I just have to shout out Anthony here. Like when I was working on the SDK, I worked on trying to move the code generation over to Swift for a solid 9 months before he even arrived. And he was able to see very quickly that the direction that I was going in was actually not going to work at all. And he has absolutely crushed it coming in and learning how all of this, the getting really, really, really deep in the weeds with the spec and coming up with a solution that is far better than anything I could have written. So I'm really excited to get this out to people.
Well, thank you for that, but I don't know if that's true, Ellen. It's all being built on top of the work you did, and it was really an excellent foundation. So thank you for getting us to the point we were at.
Yeah, I tried. I want to open up the floor for a few more questions if people have them. But I think in the meantime, I do want to ask a couple of questions that we had sort of standing by. Has anybody here used Apollo with either SwiftUI or Jetpack Compose?
Yeah, I can answer a bit of that. At Netflix, we are starting to evaluate Compose as the next, UI framework we're going to use. And yeah, so far it's working really well. I think part of that is how Apollo Android is generating models. Everything is strongly typed and tightly coupled to your schema. So that can be used, and it's immutable, which works really well with Compose, how you can refresh actually views in Compose. So far the experience has been great. I'm sure we'll be having many more discussions with Martin once we start to use more and more Compose around maybe, building view models automatically or these kind of things. But I think right now it's still in a very good shape.
Awesome.
John O'Reilly from the community has been doing a talk. I think it was at DroidCon Berlin a few days ago about using Apollo and Compose. And I was looking up I'll paste the link in the chat. But if you're interested more into that, like that's a super good intro to using GraphQL and Jetpack Compose in the project. Like there's sample code, there's everything. And I think it makes sense because especially if you use the normalized cache, like a lot of ideas are relatively similar. Like in Compose, you have a reactive UI with a single source of truth. And if you have a normalized cache, it's also a single source of truth, and you can react to changes there. So it definitely makes a lot of sense to me.
Cool.
I think the team's in the early days of evaluating Jetpack Compose, so not as far as long for sure than the folks at Netflix. For SwiftUI, I have personal PTSD from being a very early adopter of Swift back in the day at LinkedIn, and so we have like one screen, I think, in the app that uses SwiftUI. It does not interact with Apollo. I think there's still some patterns. Like the last time I tried this, like earlier this year, it felt like there was still some of the patterns that we often like rely on in iOS to have, like scalable modular apps that don't really have a clear counterpart yet on the SwiftUI side. And so I feel like that's probably more of the type of blocker or thing that we would have to figure out, or that will, the community will need to figure out, like, what does it mean to actually have like a modular SwiftUI app for a production app? And that feels like not figured out yet at all.
Yeah. Anthony, you look like you want to say something.
Yeah, I was just going to say, this is something that we've really started to think about a lot. And, we're still working through the model layer and the networking layer. But after that, what we really want to do is rebuild the cache to allow much more fine-grained access to individual fields and individual entities. Right now, it's all based on your GraphQL query operations, and that kind of batches an entire cache entity or nested set of entities based on that operation. But it's really difficult right now to be able to update your UI components based on one field changing. You have to refetch the entire query. So when we rewrite the cache, my goal is to build, if not building specific property wrappers and actual bindings for SwiftUI, building out a cache that allows people to hook into it in a way that the community can start to build much more functional reactive paradigm features that work with SwiftUI, that work with other caching and data source mechanisms. If they want to do more core data or realm support for data persistence, allowing them to do that through interacting with the cache that we've created rather than interacting with only an actual GraphQL query operation.
Awesome. Let's see, I think we had one question that got answered in chat. So I will go to another question. So we're going to have a talk later today about the GraphQL spec for 2021 that was just released in October. Do any of you have anything that you're particularly excited about based on those changes to the spec, the 2021 changes?
The nice thing with the spec is that we have the draft for like 2 years before it goes stable. So most of the changes from the spec that went live in a few weeks ago, they were already, I think, in Apollo Android and Apollo iOS. Correct me if I'm wrong, Anthony, but most of it was already there for a few months or maybe 1 year actually. So it's not to say that nothing moving, but there's a lot of stuff moving in the spec. So it's more like the draft is more interesting than the actual released spec as far as we are concerned. So yeah, I don't know, stuff like different stream can be interesting, or there's also discussion at the moment about client-side nullability, all this kind of stuff.
Yeah, I agree. I've been working with GraphQL for over 2 years now, and most of the functionality and features that I couldn't imagine using GraphQL without those features were in the working draft already for quite a while now. Things like, being able to implement interfaces that implement other interfaces is really, really important. And I'm excited to have that finalized and in the in a 2021 finalized GraphQL spec, but we're already looking forward to client-side nullability directives like Martin was talking about, and all of the new work that the GraphQL Federation is planning on implementing in the spec in the next year or two. So it's great to have something finalized, but we're always moving forward and always building something new, and I'm far more excited about that.
Awesome. Cool. We have a question from the audience, by the way. This is George Michael. He's decided that he wants to join us, talk about GraphQL. So Aaron Kongsberg asks, curious what you guys are seeing for Android, iOS specific implementations versus React and React Native. And I'm also going to throw in Kotlin multi-platform mobile to that question, because I think that's something that's dealt with much more directly by the Apollo Android library. So have any of you worked with multi-platform implementations of GraphQL?
So okay.
I was
going to say, obviously, I've worked with Kotlin multi-platform implementation. It's mostly focused at models and network layers, so it's not too much about UI. And it still means you have to write some UI in SwiftUI, some UI in Jetpack Compose, and then you use Apollo Android for the model/networking layer. If you want to use React Native, I guess you could use Apollo client, the web client, and it would work just fine.
Yeah, I've seen people that are mostly using the web client, but then occasionally I've seen a couple of people who are using React Native and then like calling into our native libraries. I don't really know how many I don't really know how many people are doing that, but I've definitely seen like at least one. So it's definitely something where I think for stuff like React Native or Ionic or something like that, people do tend to stick to web-based libraries. So using the Apollo client, that's just called Apollo client. Speaking of that, I know that we've had some discussions recently. How do you? So I'll throw this to Martin because this is the most obvious one. I know that now Apollo Android is really also supporting a lot of other things. Have you thought about changing the name to more fully represent what?
There's an open issue about that. We get reminders, so you can go to the issue, put some thumbs up.
Yes. All right. Cool.
That might happen one day. Yes.
Awesome. And I know we might also, Anthony, what do you think about the Apollo iOS, since it does support tvOS, watchOS, macOS, and maybe someday Linux?
Absolutely. I mean, my goal is to get it supporting Linux, and really, I mean, at that point, it is Apollo Swift. It's not just Apollo iOS. We already support all of the other, Mac or macOS, tvOS, like you said, all iPadOS, all of those things. And I would love to see us do integrations where there could be a version of Apollo server in Swift that works with Vapor or Katura or any of the other Swift server backends out there, that we could really reuse a lot of the parsing, the validation logic, the execution layer, the GraphQL generated models. I think there's really a lot of exploration there to do. Like I said, I think the theme for me today is just the future holds so many opportunities, and I'm really, really excited to just keep building all of this stuff.
Awesome. I think we're running out of time, so I want to let everybody wrap up and let people know where they can find you. So Martin, if people want to follow up with you, where can they find you?
GitHub all the time, or Twitter. My name is Martin Bonin on Twitter, so you can ping me on Twitter. I'm there too.
Awesome. Olivier, how about you?
Mostly GitHub, Olivier G13, and LinkedIn as well.
Excellent. Camila.
I'm at Camila on Twitter. It's probably the easiest place to find me.
Excellent.
You got and at Anthony. Camila. That's amazing.
Yeah. There's the summer, I was on summer break. I was really bored. I kept hearing all these podcasts talk about this thing called Twitter. And I was like, I guess I'll grab my name. And I had no idea. It was like really random. So
That's awesome. Well, I am Anthony M. Dev on Twitter and on GitHub, and I'm super active on the Apollo libraries. So please reach out if you want to talk about anything or have questions or want to know more about what we're doing with 1.0. I'd love to get more comments from the community on the request for comment, the RFC we have out there for the code gen. So please keep in touch, everyone out there. Thanks.
Yeah, thanks a lot, everyone. And you can find me at Designated Nerd on Twitter. If you thought George Michael was cute, I'm at Loud Guitars on Instagram. I have 2 cats. I take like a million pictures of them. And I just want to say thank you so much to everybody for participating today. Again, would love to hear from those of you in the audience, just hear your feedback. We really, really rely on your feedback to make our products better. And with that, I do want to mention one quick thing, which is happy 85th birthday to my dad. And finally, I'm going to throw it back to Ciora. Have a good day.